What if you could map Alberta's energy future? At Emissions Reduction Alberta, our technology roadmap, or TRM, is exactly that. It's our master strategy document, a living guide that shapes investment decisions, identifies opportunity areas, and helps innovators see how their technologies fit within the bigger picture. Now in its 5th edition, the TRM highlights 5 key focus areas, from industrial decarbonization to emerging energy, designed to capture Alberta's strengths while adapting to a rapidly changing global landscape. It's not a prescription, but a map, outlining the terrain, the possible routes, and the trade-offs along the way. You may have heard my voice on previous episodes, but allow me to introduce myself. I'm Craig Werner, ERA's Director of Partnerships and Engagement. In this episode, I sit down with 2 of my colleagues, Chris Owttirm, Executive Director of Technology and Innovation, and Isabella Tarasco, Innovation Investment Manager, to talk about the TRM. More specifically, what it is, why it matters, and how it's evolving to help Alberta's industries navigate towards a low-carbon future. Here on Carbon Copy. Well, good morning, Chris and Isabella. We're finally here to talk about TRM. This is great, the moment we've been waiting for. So let's start simple for our listeners. What is our technology roadmap, and why does ERA have one?
Great place to start. I'd say at a very high level, the technology roadmap, or TRM, is really ERA's master strategy document. It's what guides our investment decisions and lays out our vision for what the future of Alberta's industries and technologies could look like as we continue to evolve into the future. Overall, its purpose is really to inform our business planning, our programming design, and our investment decisions, while also, again, helping people visualize what we mean when we say we're investing in various sectors and technologies. And I'll just say, whenever we're introducing ERA to somebody new who hasn't heard of us before, whether it's a potential applicant or somebody outside of Alberta, their number one question is, so what does ERA invest in, and how can I understand if my technology or my company or my project fits? And our answer to that is basically, go read the TRM.
It's a great answer. And I think it's something that everybody that's at least interested in knowing about ERA, that's a great place to start. And if you want to orientate yourself on what the organization does and what we invest in. So Isabella, has ERA always had a TRM, and what's inspired it in the past?
Yeah, it's a really great question. We published our 5th edition about 10 months ago in October 2024, and our first edition was published in 2016. So going back to that edition, it's a few years after we were started, but we really felt like ERA needed a document, exactly as Chris mentioned, to inform our portfolio mix, guide our investments, and really contribute to the alignment of the broader innovation system and how ERA plays within that system. So what types of technologies do we invest in? What types of projects do we invest in? And how is our investment essentially thinking and our views on the projects informed by a broader context? So, going back to that initial document, I would say quite a few things have changed. However, the main core goal of the technology roadmap is really the same, in that we want to invest in opportunities across timescales, looking at some of those, major investment areas of focus and principles around how we design the TRM. We want to identify industry need and market pull for the technologies that we invest in. We want to build on Alberta's existing strengths and continue to create some new opportunities for the province, but also receive guidance from our partners in the innovation ecosystem, who we communicate with almost daily, I would say, and leverage other work that's being done across the province and across the country.
Thanks, Isabella. That's a lot of insights around how it can be used, who finds it important, anecdotally, I find when we're at conferences or events and we've got our materials out, we can see that the technology roadmap is one of those that people pick up very readily. The versions we've had in the past and the most recent one, well designed. We also, I think the way the content is laid out is very clear and intuitive for people. So, Chris, we've talked a little bit about it. What do you think we're trying to accomplish with each of these versions that we release, and what's that driving objective?
Well, Craig, I actually think you said it perfectly, which is it's the best way we have, the best tool we have to introduce people to what ERA is all about. And I've definitely been at those conferences when those pamphlets have been flying off the shelves because people are really keen to read about what we're doing, to understand how we see the technology landscape based on all of our intel from the proposals we receive, from the projects that we do complete, and then, as Isabella said, from the conversations we have with other people in the ecosystem. So it's really that all-encompassing vision that helps people understand how ERA fits in and what we're looking at. The other thing I'll say in terms of a driving objective is that we really think of the roadmap as a map. It's not a direction. If you think about when you open a map, for those that remember when paper maps still existed, you open that up and it doesn't tell you where to go. You have to say, I want to get from Edmonton to Calgary, and then you can follow different pathways on the map to get there. That's what we mean when we say roadmap. It's outlining the terrain and outlining the potential routes and the pluses and minuses of going different ways. But what it's not doing is saying we must go a certain way. It's very deliberate about that.
Thanks, Chris. That's a great explanation. And I think listeners will appreciate when you open that document, what's the lens that you can apply as you look through it. Okay, so Isabella, you mentioned it. We put this document out, our latest version, 10 months ago, but the world doesn't stop turning. What's changed since our last TRM came out? And do you think the priorities that we had at that point in time still hold right now?
Yeah, I would say every TRM that we release, we have a front end piece. If you've taken a look at our document, there's a piece around context and considerations where we look at what's happening in the world, what's happening in Canada, and really what's happening in Alberta that can really help frame and shape some of our investment decisions to help us make the best decisions with the information that we have and invest in the best technologies with the highest potential for future success. So that context at the front end is always changing, and we can talk a little bit about that in a bit. But I would say what's most interesting to me is understanding, whether the outlined focus areas that we put in the technology roadmap really align with the projects that we're seeing that come into us. So we always launch a broad industrial transformation challenge call in the spring going forward, and that's our sort of, I don't want to say catch-all, but essentially our catch-all call where we solicit proposals from all types of sectors and industries. And what's interesting is trying to figure out whether the proposals that are coming in, the projects that industry representatives are working on, really fit within these areas. And I believe they do. And so that's what's really interesting to me. It's understanding, yes, they do fit. So it's giving us that validation that these focus areas are still relevant, but also it's interesting to see what where the largest share of projects are happening within each of these areas, which helps us inform, maybe we need to do a bit more reach out to different sectors, different engagement sessions with other industries just to find out, hey, you're maybe not bringing in projects that, we've seen in the past or that we've seen recently. Is there something that ERA could do to, help see some of these projects and potentially help you see yourself in the roadmap when we publish it?
I really like that. I suppose that's the constant work, is seeing, we're at a point in time, we have a view of the world, but then it's really a case of, once we put out a call or we start to do the work, we kind of see what those investment opportunities, what presents itself to us. Chris, can you take us through? So we've talked a bit about the objective and what the TRM is. What are those technology areas that we have highlighted in the TRM so far?
Thanks, Craig. So the focus areas, as you said, are really the core of the document, and it's the framework upon which we build out the rest of that document and then all of our funding programs and initiatives. So I think it's important to take a bit of time and just quickly go through them. So the 5th edition of our technology roadmap has 5 technology focus areas: improved efficiency, emerging energy, industrial decarbonization, circular economy, and carbon management. And so, as you can imagine from those titles of those areas, they are deliberately quite broad, and there is, by design, a little bit of overlap between those areas. And I think that's something that we really work to understand. As Isabella said, we see hundreds of proposals a year, and the exercise of going through and bucketing them is actually one of the ways by which we can continuously check our work and say, is the field of opportunities out there aligning with what we thought it would be when we published the document? Looking at the 5 areas, with each of those areas, we've assessed them on a matrix of sort of risk versus opportunity. So what is the level of technology development within each of those sectors? What is the need for funding, and especially the risk capital that ERA provides within each of those sectors, and their alignment with Alberta? So that defines sort of the opportunity space and sort of the balancing the risk and reward. And then on the reward side, the opportunity for benefits from investments in those areas. So each of those areas has a little bit of a different skew between greenhouse gas benefits, environmental benefits, and economic benefits. And you can, if you read the document, you can see how we've scored each of those 5 areas in those different factors and where they sort of fit on that overall matrix. And that's part of how we think about, again, when we're thinking about designing funding programs, where are we trying to put our dollars to make the biggest impact? And part of it is filling gaps in the portfolio. Part of it is building on existing strengths in the portfolio. And part of it is being able to nimbly respond to things that maybe we didn't anticipate. So the roadmap is really foundational to all of those things because it provides, again, that lens, which I think is the word you used, which I think is so important. It's a lens by which we can interpret what's happening in the world and what's happening in the proposals that are coming to us.
And I think it's important to just clarify that, you know, when we talk to technology developers, when we talk to industry representatives, there may be a sliding scale in terms of where they fit within each of those categories. They may fit in multiple categories in terms of the projects they're bringing forward. There may be difference in terms of their opportunities, the risks, and in terms of the needs of investment. And so we've intentionally designed these areas to be quite flexible, where we're hoping that technology providers and those that are working on innovation can see themselves within each of those areas, understanding that we don't have all of the answers. It's just based on what we've seen in the past when we do our engagements before we actually launch a new edition of the TRM, just to find out where the industry currently is in general, but there may be some outliers, and we recognize that for sure.
If I can just say one more thing on the focus areas, I think the concept of our investment approach as being a portfolio of portfolios is really important. Because not only is each technology area spanning a range of sectors and industries, as Isabella alluded to, and within each area there's a broad range of technologies that might be represented. So it's sort of within each sector there might be technologies that are very specific to the needs of that sector. There might also be cross-cutting technology opportunities, and we've really tried to sprinkle those throughout the 5 focus areas. The other way that the focus areas are broad, and deliberately so, is that they cover a range of technology readiness levels and commercial readiness levels. And so within each focus area, there's actually different tools that we can deploy based on where each technology is at. So it's not kind of a one-size-fits-all approach. It's understanding that there's a lot of complexity within each of these areas, and you can continue to dig down, which in fact is what we do all the time as part of our analysis of the portfolio.
It's a great additional piece of analysis, Chris, because it really highlights that. And the nature of the work that we do and ERA as an organization is the need to be flexible and the need to be nimble and adjust accordingly based on opportunities that present themselves. And I think the way you describe it, this should be helpful insights for people reading the TRM. That's kind of the way they need to look at it. Is that there's a lot of layers within it. From your perspective, Chris, what's changed since the last time we put out the roadmap?
Yeah, boy, did you say it. I think the only constant in the world of new technology is change, as probably should be implicit. We know that when we put out a roadmap, it's a snapshot in time. But what we're really trying to do is understand the current geopolitical and technological and market context of the moment, but also try to do a bit of that forecasting exercise and build a document that is, in some ways, a living document, as we've spoken to, but in some ways is also a little bit future-proofed by being, comprehensive and covering those different possibilities of how the world can evolve. I'll say definitely if I could do it again, I probably wouldn't have us publish it a month before the US election. Maybe the timing was not ideal because we know that things have changed in the world since that election. Obviously, the policy landscape has shifted dramatically. Investor confidence in various sectors has, I'd say, it's fair to say, dramatically changed. And the outlook for some technologies is maybe different than it was at the time we published the roadmap. But I would say that the overall direction of the roadmap, I still feel very confident about. We've picked 5 technology areas that we see as necessary for Alberta in almost any future policy or market scenario. That was a deliberate guiding principle of the roadmap. And so far, I think that's holding up quite well. If you look at what we have in terms of the 5 focus areas and the technologies that are listed there, all of those are progressing. There's still progress being made around the world, not just here in Alberta. But we've also seen a lot of great steps forward here at home. And that's encouraging because it means that we're tapping into those trends and the very real market dynamics that are playing out on a real-time basis.
And Isabella, if you think about how we're evaluating projects, what we're looking at, from your perspective, has anything changed in terms of the approach of maybe how we're looking to execute on our TRM?
Yeah, in the TRM, we've always had a heavy emphasis on the emissions challenge, and that continues to be the case going forward. However, in the past, historically, we've also looked at some additional environmental benefits, and this has held true for all of the projects that come into ERA. We've always asked about GHG benefits first and foremost, but then looking at some of those ancillary benefits as secondary benefits. We have since actually brought that more to the front when we evaluate some projects where we assess proposals in their ability to deliver some of these additional environmental outcomes, including improved water management, reduced land use, improved waste reduction and waste reuse pathways, and soil and groundwater remediation. So there are some projects that come to us that may not have strong greenhouse gas benefits, but provide other environmental benefits that are equally as important and have a strong economic benefit and economic outcomes to the province as well that we feel we should also be looking at because they typically go hand in hand with some additional environmental and GHG benefits. So, I would say in terms of what's changed, the emissions challenge is still relevant. However, we also want to evaluate and look at these other environmental benefits. And so I would say that's shifted since we put out the TRM. Perhaps there's a way forward to look at some of these additional environmental benefits, bringing them closer to the front of our technology roadmap.
And I think what's really cool is you can see how the roadmap is laying the groundwork for that shift. Even though we hadn't envisioned the exact form that it would take, right? You could see throughout the document there's references to those environmental benefits, those nexuses of impact that you mentioned, where there's emissions benefit, economic outcomes, and the environmental benefits. And it's that power of and that we like to speak to a lot because that's really our sweet spot. If I can maybe just give you one concrete example of how our positioning in the roadmap really supports reacting to the unexpected. So in the roadmap, we spoke to issues like energy security, supply chain security. That's obviously shifted. I think at the time we were writing it, the Ever Given was still stuck in the Suez Canal. That's obviously been resolved now, but the supply chain issue has not gone away, and energy security is more top of mind than ever. So we made references to that in the document. That seems to be, top of a lot of people's minds right now, providing reliable, affordable, and secure energy supplies. And one thing that we didn't maybe, again, envision specifically was the rapid growth in AI data centers. We alluded to the fact that there was going to be growing load on the electricity system, and we noted the need for new grid investments. And I think those sort of, if you were reading the document, those might not have jumped out at you at the time that we published it. If you read the document now with the context of all of this load growth coming for AI data centers, those leap off the page at you because you say, oh, this is actually speaking to this emergent need that's come up in that intervening time. So again, that's one of the things that makes us feel really confident in, hey, we got this right. We really flagged something that was coming. Even if we didn't know the specific context of it, we knew that we were going to have to be moving in that direction and skating to where the puck is going, which is, an overused metaphor, but it really is emblematic of how we think about the TRM.
And that's the role that it plays for us as an organization and for partners and all of the other actors in the ecosystem. Thanks to you both for really shining a bit of a light and providing that context on what this document is and how it's useful, not only for ERA's work, but for those that partner with us and work with us and are looking to get projects funded. Now, we've talked about the 5 technology areas. Maybe we can make it a little bit more real for our listeners so that they get a sense of what this actually looks like, maybe in labs or facilities and sites around the province. Let's talk about industrial decarbonization, for example. We talked with E3 Lithium earlier this year about their technology that extracts lithium found in brine, a waste product from the oil and gas industry, and turns it into battery-grade lithium carbonate. So this project transforms what was previously considered waste into a valuable resource. Let's listen to a clip of that conversation.
I actually see an allegory of the oil sands in that, right? We know the resource was there, much like lithium, but it's not a conventional resource that the conventional producers, again, oil producers or conventional lithium producers, are used to, and we need a bit of technological innovation to make that industry work here in the Alberta context. And so again, really, really exciting to see that innovation being pushed forward.
The SAG-D is a great analogy where, government supported the first technological development and you got a project up and running. It proved it can happen. And now look at the size of that industry and how much revenue it generates for the province. And so I think it is really important if we put the size of what the lithium industry can be into perspective. We have the most lithium resources under National Instrument 43-101, which is the code that we report our resources under, in the world, in Alberta. We have a large amount of lithium here. And so the size of the prize is huge for this province. Should companies like us be successful, and we're not the only ones operating in Alberta. There are other companies. We're certainly now leading the charge with the technology development and with the path towards commercial. We're the most advanced, but there are others that are doing very good work to develop a project as well. And so the success of one is the success of all.
So that was a conversation you had, Chris, with Chris Doornbos. Do you want to provide a few more insights into sort of the impact of that kind of project and how E3 Lithium's project fits within that industrial decarbonization?
When I was listening to Chris and myself speak, I was thinking to our definition of industrial decarbonization in the roadmap. So if you'll let me, I'll read that off.
Yeah.
Novel processes, practices, and feedstocks to deliver step change improvements in emissions performance for major emitting sectors and the development of new low emissions products and industries. And the way we assess that area is that it has very high opportunity to deliver those economic and environmental benefits. When I say it, I mean industrial decarbonization as a focus area. And we know that projects in this area can really benefit from funding because in many cases we are creating new industries. And so that risk capital is extremely important. To me, when I listened to that clip from the E3 episode of our podcast and I pair it up against what we're talking about in the roadmap about industrial decarbonization, it really sinks in that, this is an area that has that long-term potential to deliver those outsized benefits. It's a bet today in an industry that could be huge for Alberta in 10, 20, 30 years. And that's what industrial decarbonization is all about.
So if listeners want to hear more, they can listen to the episode 37, Unlocking Alberta's Mineral Potential. Maybe as the next example, we can explore improved efficiency. We spoke with Kuva Systems earlier this year too, on their permanent installation and demonstration of a methane imaging solution at 100 well sites to provide continuous leak detection and quantification for tank emissions and facility monitoring. Let's take a listen to that conversation too. So it sounds like your tech works, and then you realize, but really capitalizing on the potential of this, the current way you're doing it is just not optimal. What did that second project with ERA, that second grant, allow Kuva to do that maybe wasn't possible up until that point?
The learning from the first one was that, as you say, it was cumbersome and it wasn't ideal as a substitute that we had initially set out to do. But there was a second portion of that initial project that we had where we had this a light tower trailer, one of these things that you set up at construction sites with lights on it, diesel generator, and it would have a 10-meter tall mast. And we put one of these cameras on top of that. When we learned that we could do this and leave it up there and actually continuously monitor these types of things and see the fluctuations in emissions that do come from sources like tanks. That was kind of a revolutionary thought that we were able to, determine that if we can do this well and easily and set this up, you can keep outside of the hazardous zone of the tank, so you're not in the emissions. You don't need to be there to touch it. And it really allows you to understand the emissions profile from this tank and this set of tanks. And by doing that, we learned that this could really be a market for us. It was around the same time that a lot of reports were coming out about the prevalence of tanks being a source of emissions. And so the market need for continuous monitoring was budding at this stage around 2020. And we realized that if we redesigned the camera in such a way that we could see a lot further, we'd be able to set this up at site and use it for continuous monitoring.
So fantastic to hear from the CUVA team. And this project is a great example of one of those projects that ERA has seen the success from project application intake all the way to now where CUVA is now, where they're positioned as a leader in the methane monitoring space. And they were recently acquired by Sensirion Connected Solutions, which specializes in sensor-based IoT solutions and services for emissions monitoring. They're part of Sensirion Holding, which is a global manufacturer of high-performance digital microsensors. So really great to see them have their technology deployed in the field. And what's great about CUVA's technology is that it falls in that indirect emissions reductions category. So backing up a step, ERA takes a look at projects on a number of different emissions reduction scales. So direct emissions reductions, which really actively lower emissions at the source. Indirect emissions reductions, which don't directly reduce at the source, but provide the tools or data to help operators understand where their emission sources are. So these are things like monitoring, measurement, and leak detection technologies. So CUVA's falls into this category because it enables operators to detect and act on methane leaks more quickly and more effectively. So it's great to see that the positive operator feedback on this, and it was supported by a number of different industry operators, and it was the first continuous methane monitoring system approved by the Alberta Energy Regulator under the Owttirm program. So during the project, it was deployed at nearly 100 sites, which really provided valuable data that enabled design improvements and operational reliability. And what's great about this is that it is one of those solutions and projects that we point to when folks come and ask us, well, I have a methane detection technology, or I have a technology that collects data. And we always ask, well, what are you going to do with that data? How are you going to translate that into impact? And how does that actually help operators make better decisions in their daily operations? So this is a great project that really put that into action and helped, demonstrate the viability and demonstrate that there are tangible solutions out there.
I'd say it's also a great example of when we put these visioning statements in the roadmap, we're not just pulling them out of thin air, we're grounding them in the projects that we've had and the successes that we've seen. So if I read the improved efficiency area in the roadmap, we say that our vision is for Alberta to be the birthplace of numerous methane technologies with global export potential to leverage into even greater impacts in the future. And I can't think of a better example of that than CUVA. That's, what we were thinking about when we wrote that part of the roadmap.
And it speaks to technologies that we think are important. And it almost kind of goes back to some of those initial guiding principles for the roadmap, where we want to ensure that projects that we invest in align with market need. And so this is where you can see a great demonstration of that through, our operator interest in the project and participation, having operators have the CUVA instruments at their site, and then eventually having CUVA acquired by a larger company that, again, specializes in this type of equipment with a broad global reach. It's just a really fantastic signal that, hey, we invested in something that the market really saw value in.
Such a great point. It's a great success story, and great to see that they're going on to bigger and better things. So if you want to learn more about Kuva, you can listen to episode 38 of our podcast called Methane Monitoring Reimagined. You can listen to Carbon Copy podcast on your preferred streaming platform. So that's how the TRM shows up, not just as a policy document, but in real work we're supporting on the ground. Let's pull back the curtain a bit, because this document didn't just appear fully formed. So maybe Isabella, what was the process of building the TRM like?
Yeah, I would say every round it starts, again, not a few months before, I would say almost a year before we actually release it, where we do a lot of technology scouting. We're always looking for new opportunities out there. We're always talking to innovators, industry representatives, regular touch points with government, and our colleagues over at Alberta Innovates as well, who are working on some great things in the earlier stage TRL level space. So building on what's coming through the pipe. We like to find out, what's new and what's novel that we should be taking a look at. So the first is really gathering all of this intel from some of these formal and informal conversations that we have, coupled with researching. So we look at different papers, reports that have been released, policy documents, frameworks. All of this goes into the researching component of the technology roadmap, which I would say formally begins almost a year before we actually release the document. We then go into a targeted engagement sessions, which many of you may have been a part of and will continue to be part of in the future, where we talk to industry representatives, academia, thought leaders, governments, to really understand, well, what is the market saying? What does industry need going forward? And really trying to find out what some of those important and relevant focus areas are going to be, both now and in the future, and how we as an organization can maybe look at those focus areas differently or pivot some of those technologies that we have within each of those focus areas and move them across the timescales in terms of, potentially they're ready now, whereas in the past they were, kind of later in the TRL level scale, but not quite ready to be deployed. So that's how we look at the continuum of technology that's coming in through our programs and through our processes. I would say that's then followed by really in-depth writing of the technology roadmap, many iterations of drafts, working through both internal as well as validation with external audiences, and working with our communications team to essentially make the document look as fantastic as it always looks. So it's a long process. It's a lot of work. But the nice thing is that we don't do it alone. And we've got a great community of innovators in the province and around the world that we lean on for their support.
I think you might intuit from the title that the technology roadmap is really a technical team document that's just led by a few of us nerds here at ERA. But I always like to think of it as more than that. It's really a cross-functional document that represents the best that ERA has to offer from all of our business lines and from all of our various expertise, whether that's the technical side, as Isabella alluded to, or the folks that we have working in policy analysis, market assessment, and things like that. So it is bringing together a variety of different perspectives, because we know technology alone is not the answer. We need to convene complete solutions, and that phrase appears many times in the roadmap for that reason. But as Isabella said, it's really about a collaborative process, and that's really the fun of it, because we get to come up with some ideas, we get to hear from people, test those with our stakeholders, our audience, and then come up with revisions and improvements to make sure, again, that this is reflecting the very best, vision for Alberta that aligns really with what's happening on the ground. The worst thing we could do would be to develop this document in isolation in a silo, and it's just Chris, writing it down on the back of a napkin and putting it out in the world. That's not going to deliver the best value. It's all about the collaborative approach and engaging to get, many bright minds in the room and get the best possible outcome.
Let's look ahead. What does the future hold for the technology roadmap and how ERA uses it?
Well, so as Isabella said, we have committed to making this a very much a living document and updating it as frequently as possible. Obviously, given that it takes about a year to develop and things are constantly changing, the 18-month to 2-year turnaround that we have for it is, I think, really well aligned with kind of the ebbs and flows of this ecosystem. So suffice to say, we're already thinking about the next version, and I know the team's going to have a lot of fun putting it together. I certainly will. But in terms of what we're thinking about, there's a couple of big pieces. One is obviously all of the changes in the geopolitical landscape, in the market, in technology, where 2 years ago, the technology of 2 years ago is not the same technology that we have today. Some technology has made dramatic steps forward. And when you think about technologies that are at very high scale now that are being mass produced, they're on very dramatic learning curves in terms of cost improvement. We've seen battery energy storage dramatically reduce its costs, even since the roadmap was published, as just one example. And so we always need to be updating the document to reflect those shifts. The other thing that we really will be spending a lot of time on is looking at our portfolio, so the projects that have completed or in progress that are generating data and lessons learned for us on a continuous basis. So we have an entire team dedicated to compiling those insights and outcomes, all of the interesting data, all of the interesting anecdotes, and that also feeds into the TRM development. And then the last piece, as Isabella said, in the 10 months since the roadmap has come out and sort of over the 2 years before the next version comes out, we will probably receive somewhere on the order of 1,000 proposals. And so gathering, compiling, and then synthesizing insights from that huge body of data is really what's going to help us make sure that the TRM remains current and that the new version represents sort of our best representation of where we are at that point in time when it comes out, but again, maintains that future-proof nature, that it's going to be relevant and somewhat of a living document for its 2-year duration.
We've also talked a lot about how great the roadmap is and how it responds to industry needs and the vision that we have for the roadmap. And I'd like to also bring a bit of realism in that we are cognizant of industry needs, and we know that innovation is hard now more than ever. Companies are pulling back some of their investments in research and development, and we want to understand why that is and continue to work with industry representatives to really see if there's a way within our means and how we operate to essentially help them implement some of this innovation and move forward as a society. And so I think it's really important that we're always keeping that in mind. Innovation's challenging now more so than ever. Decarbonization is very tricky. It's always been very hard. And so I think keeping that in mind and understanding how we can work with industry representatives, understand their signals, but also deliver on the government priorities and their mandates moving forward. It's going to be really interesting. We're in a great space to work with a lot of different audience members from industry, government, academia. And so understanding where some of those signals are and how that translates into some of the investments that we're making in the future, making sure that all industries see themselves in the areas that we put out is going to be critical. And to that point, I would say we do want to increase our focus on environmental benefits. And looking ahead, we're still developing ways in which we can do that in the new iteration of the roadmap. So whether that's through a new focus area or revisiting some of the current focus areas to potentially highlight some of those environmental benefits and bring them to the front a little bit more will be something that we're looking at.
Great way to bring it to a close. A key takeaway for me in this technology roadmap of ours, I think, is it helps us align, it helps us respond, and it helps us invest with purpose. To our listeners, if you're interested in reading the TRM, you can find that on our website. And if you're keen to listen to more of the episodes that we've referenced throughout the conversation, you can find them on your preferred podcast platform, and you can find them on our website as well. Thank you, Chris and Isabella, for your insights. It was great spending some time with you this morning, and it's always a pleasure to hear what you're thinking about, and I'm really looking forward to how you're approaching the 6th edition of the TRM.